Hi, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to be calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for April 20th, 2022. Before we get started, I just wanted to welcome everybody. It's so good to see all of your faces again from last year. To all new members, it's good to have new people here and joining in. We had a meeting a few months ago, so we have all spent some time together, but it's good to be together again. For the public's interest, we will be meeting every Wednesday for a few weeks and tackling this budget little bits at a time. So please stay engaged and ask questions and come and provide public testimony if you can. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Tigan?
Present.
Member Tom Anderson?
Here.
Member Chirac?
Here.
Member Phillips?
Here.
Member Leung?
Here.
Member Cohen?
Here.
Member Gonzalez?
Here.
Member Brown?
Present.
Member Hoy?
Here.
Member William Anderson? Absent. Member Nordike?
Here.
Member Soares?
Present.
Member Varney?
Here.
Member Milton?
Here.
Member Bennett is absent. Member Vieira Brandel?
Here.
And Chair Stapleton.
Here.
Thank
you. It's a lot of us, huh? Just kept going and going. I'm used to council where it's a little bit shorter. Let's see here. Member Hoy, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. We do have an addition to the agenda for tonight. Could I have a motion to approve the additions to the agenda?
I move approval of the additions to the agenda.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right. The addition is some written testimony from NEN, one of our Northeast neighborhood associations. See, any discussion at all? All right. Would the recorder please, are we doing the roll call, Josh, or are we just aye and nay?
Just a voice vote.
Okay. Voice vote tonight. So all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. All right, tonight we're going to start with some public testimony. And let me see here. The Budget Committee meeting agenda is organized in such a way that more closely aligns with the City Council agenda. This is an opportunity at the beginning to provide comments on the agenda items. Let me see here. At the end of the meeting, we'll have opportunity to comment on items that are not on the agenda. Tonight, we have 3 people signed up to testify. For the members of the public who have signed up, please provide your name and neighborhood or ward that you reside in. And then you will have 3 minutes to testify before the committee. If you are representing a group, you will be provided 5 minutes. And the first person that is signed up to speak is Catherine Daniels.
Here we go. Good evening, members of the committee. I'm Catherine Daniels, Vice Chair of the Library Advisory Board and speaking for the lab tonight. I live in Ward 2. In 1995, when the West Salem branch of the library first opened, and for many years after that, it had a 6-day-a-week schedule for a total of 35 hours and with full children's programming. The recession years set back many city services, but a decade later, the Main and West Salem branch services have not come near to recovering. While the city's population has grown by 1/3 since 1995, services at the branch have slowly shrunk to the current level of just 2 days a week for a total of 8 hours with no children's programming. This contrasts dramatically with the data for all other branch libraries in Oregon, which are open 6 to 7 days a week for 50+ hours. The branch's hours of 10 to 2, Tuesdays and Thursdays, don't even accommodate the schedules of children or many working people. It has essentially become a place to pick up holds. Yet despite all this, the city's proposed budget is for static library funding for the next fiscal year. We do understand that growing PERS and healthcare costs stretch the budget's ability to satisfy all demands, but we consider the library to be an essential service, not a place to absorb budget shortfalls. Libraries everywhere are trending towards filling important gaps in needed social services, particularly to underserved communities, and our library has the potential to do this. The lab also supports funding to allow the main library to be open 7 days a week, consistent with every main library in Oregon. It may be time for the city to consider raising a variety of fees, fines, and other contributing streams of income to the general fund that will ensure the healthy and long-term sustainable support and growth of our library. Our board has made the following motion. The lab recommends that additional funds be added to the proposed library budget to enable the West Salem branch to return to its original 6-day-a-week, 35-hour schedule and full children's programming. We further recommend that the budget be increased to allow the main library to be open 7 days a week. Currently, staff for the West Salem branch are borrowed from the main library, which is then shorted needed staff. The annual burden cost for a library assistant is $89,000, and the ideal number of staff of the branch is 4. Senior staff have higher costs. An increase in the proposed budget of about $500,000 or less than 10% of the current proposal for the library would allow the hiring of 4 staff for the West Salem branch and perhaps allow for some number of Monday hours at the main library. That would be a start with more hopeful prospects for the future. Thank you, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Tom?
Thank you, Tom. You're muted, Tom.
That may be a good thing. Thanks for your testimony, Catherine. Yeah, quit nodding your head, Member Hoy. You know, I know that there is a lot of concern about libraries all through the city. That is West Side. There's Councilor Hoy rightfully is concerned about what we don't have in the East Side. And I know there's some other proposals potentially for the upcoming bond measure when it passes might well include some sort of mixed use library below and affordable housing above. You know, does the library board have any thoughts or position about what happens if we can't do everything? You know, do you think it's more important for West Salem or and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to make you pick, but I mean, we're going to have to, we may have to choose at some point. Do we need a library in West Salem or do you need a library in East Salem? I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, the Library Advisory Board has not discussed what we would choose to support if we had to choose. So I can't speak for them without consulting them, but certainly we have the branch already in West Salem. It makes sense to provide it with sufficient staff to operate it. But we also have to look at the future. Salem is a fast-growing city. It's also a very sprawled city, and we have a very defined need, particularly in the Northeast, for additional library services, especially to serve children. We have talked about all those issues among our members, but not specifically about what a trade-off might be.
Thank you very much. I realize I'm sort of posing a Sophie's choice, and I'm sorry to have to do that, but you know, at some point we have to make some kind of decision. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, and I thank you for yours, and I understand you're not speaking for the library board. Thanks.
Evan?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Catherine, for coming today. My question is around the West Salem Library, and you know, I used to live over in West Salem, so I'm kind of familiar with the deal that Roth's made with the library back in the day, and with the changing of ownership of Roth's. Has the board talked with the new owners around long-term planning for the library there? Is that part of your guys' conversation? Or are we, you know, talking about any of those conversations yet with the new owners?
The Library Advisory Board has not spoken about that issue. Not at this point, no. That's something we should discuss. And
yes,
also together with Kim Carroll, our librarian. with whom we
Thank
meet
you.
on a regular basis.
Wonderful. And I would just say that, it's a shame that that library has not been open since COVID, and it's something that I hear from folks about on a regular basis. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Member Source. That's a really great thing to bring up. I hadn't even thought about that change of hands and how that might affect the library over there. And yes, being the counselor of Ward 1, I do hear about the library and the need over in West Salem. And so thank you for coming down and talking to us about that. Next on our list is Laura Buell.
Thank you. Sorry, it's a little dark in here. Good evening, members of the Salem Budget Committee. I'm Laura Buell, board member of the Northeast Neighbors Neighborhood Association, also known as NEN, and resident of Ward 1. I'm here testifying on behalf of NEN in support of an increased budget for Salem's urban forestry program. Salem's urban forestry program has long been underfunded. This has resulted in an aging and unmaintained urban forest that isn't replanted enough to make up for losses, and is also more vulnerable to the stresses of severe weather events such as ice storms and heat waves. The current funding levels are not enough to enforce the city's tree code for trees on public land. But now that Salem can proudly say that it has a code that protects trees on private land, it must increase staffing even more in order to ensure that the new law is implemented. Regulations are meaningless if they're not enforced. The importance of trees to Salem's livability is undeniable. In the coming years, as we face greater risks from flooding, extreme heat, and other climate change impacts, trees must be seen as essential infrastructure that will lower dangerous temperatures, control stormwater, and protect the quality of life in Salem. Trees are not merely an attractive amenity, they are vital to city operations and the well-being of all Salemites. NEN hopes that Salem's next budget will include funds for the city's urban forestry program to accomplish the following. 1, hire more certified arborists to ensure that there is enough staff to carry out inspections and implement the city's tree regulations. 2, institute a well-staffed pruning and maintenance program. As an aside, note that inadequate pruning and deferred maintenance of Salem's tree canopy caused the impact of the 2021 ice storm to be more severe than it otherwise would have been. This caused risk to human life and safety, damage to property, and the removal of some trees that would not have needed to be removed had they been maintained prior to the storm. Salem's urban forestry program is currently reactive because it is underfunded. With proper funding, our urban forestry program can be proactive, which will lead to having a safer, healthier, and longer-lived tree canopy. Number 3, expand tree planting to replace the tree canopy lost in the ice storm and to meet city tree canopy goals in all neighborhoods. 4, update the city's community forestry plan in a manner that coordinates with and helps implement the climate action plan. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. The NEN board hopes that the city's budget will reflect the vast economic, environmental, and social benefits that trees have the potential to bring to our city if there are enough of them.
Thank you, Laura. Does anybody have any questions? Seeing none. Thank you so much for coming down and speaking about that really important topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our list is Lynn Takata.
Sorry about that. It's a little slow. So thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Lynn Takata, and I'm here from Ward 1. And I'm here to testify as well on behalf of increasing the budget for the urban forestry program. Trees make our community of Salem a much more livable place. And Our urban forestry department has been doing a fantastic job with very limited resources. We have, a new list of trees, increasing inventory, but there aren't enough resources for that department to do the work that it needs to do. So the trees not only help with our climate action plan, which is the most thing that's usually stressed, but they provide wildlife habitat, livability, the stormwater retention, and they also help prevent crime and increase property values. So there's a multitude of benefits that our canopy provides, and with the 17% loss in our tree canopy in the last year, we hope that the budget committee will consider providing additional support for the program that's been doing a fantastic job. We know the city's budget is stretched extremely thin, but thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Yes, Member Phillips, sorry, I have unstable internet, so you guys are kind of chopping in and out. I apologize.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton, and thank you, Lynn Takata, for providing the testimony that you have. And you were the second person to give us similar input tonight in your testimony. Given the constraints of the city budget, I agree with you that trees are incredibly important, and that we've been through a lot after the ice storm, especially. But are you aware of any suggestions for how we would find those funds or how we would raise the revenue needed, given that we're short-staffed in every single department across the city?
That's not my expertise, but my understanding is that the only funding for the urban forestry program is through the gas tax. So I don't know what the process might be for increasing the gas tax so that that program is better funded. And it isn't something, Councillor Phillips, that I had considered of how do you find those funds. It's possible that with increased inspection, there could be more fines, and the fines are funding some of the additional planting that's happening right now. So the fines go into the budget for planting new trees. In terms of staff, I don't have the expertise to suggest where those funds might come from. I know that the planning department needs to have arborists to help evaluate some of the new construction that's happening. And there's some talk about having earlier collaboration with the city arborist developers so that some of the problems that have occurred can be prevented. And right now there isn't someone on that planning commission that has the expertise. So the urban forestry department works on behalf of the planning department. It's a really good question, and I apologize, I do not have the answer.
No, you
guys have a hard job.
Yeah, thank you. I actually appreciate your comments. I found them quite informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Phillips. Member Tigan?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn, for your testimony, and Laura as well. I guess I just know later in the conversation tonight, probably at least I know on page 10 of our budget briefing books, we're talking about the citywide tree planting program as part of the natural resources environment stewardship. So Chance, keep listening in, and I bet we'll have those conversations about where the funds are going to come for that specific project, and also where thinking about expanding that, the arborist program to the levels that you discuss. Chances are when we get city staff engaged in the conversation, there'll be some interesting things to learn.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, that will be interesting to hear. I know that the Urban Forestry Department is housed under Public Works, but it'd be interesting to find out from staff where that funding, that program is exactly funded from. I know many of us don't understand every single line item or where it all ties back to, so that'll be good to learn. Member Milton, you have a question?
A simple question. I'm just curious, is there any federal funding for this area for tree planting through the city?
Kristen, do you know the answer to that?
I am not aware of any federal funding source other than FEMA reimbursements that we've had for tree damage. I see Director Fernandez has turned his screen on. He may be able to comment further about that.
Yeah, thank you, if I may. We're not aware of any federal funding to fund the operational needs of the urban forest, but Ms. Rutherford does speak to what we do have, which is a insurance money that came in because of the damage to the urban canopy. So I think there's about $750,000 where we are hiring 3 limited duration employees to augment our tree crews, and they are budgeted for the next 3 years, I believe. So that's in the current budget. They don't show up here in the front because they're already budgeted. The council already approved that. So in effect, the council has already increased the staffing at least for the next 3 years with the help of the insurance reimbursement that we got from the storm.
That's great. Thank you so much, Director. All right. Thank you, everybody, for the testimony and for the conversation. The next order of business on the agenda is the approval of the January 5th, 2022 Budget Committee minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'd move to approve the approval of the minutes from the meeting.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Member Tigan and a second. Oh, who do I give this to? I will give it to Member Anderson, please. All right, is there any discussion at all about this? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Great, thank you. All right, for action items tonight, I would like to ask Mr. Eggleston to review the information items in the handouts for us this evening.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Before you tonight, there are 4 information items. The first 2 are the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget books, one for the City of Salem and one for the Urban Renewal Agency. These were delivered either electronically or to your home last week. They're also available online at the City Hall for public viewing. The second and third items are for the second quarter financial reports for the city and the Urban Renewal Agency. The fourth item is a report that was requested by the Budget Committee during your January meeting regarding the cost of providing service to Salem's unsheltered residents. And that covers the information items. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Interim City Manager Kristen Rutherford, would you like to deliver the financial year 2023 proposed budget and message?
Thank you, Chair. I would love to. I think Josh is going to get my presentation started here. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Interim City Manager Kristen Rutherford, and I would like to thank all of you who volunteer to guide the city's budget through development and the approval process, and welcome all of our new Budget Committee members. I also want to thank Josh Eggleston and his staff and all of the staff in other departments in the city who have spent long hours preparing these materials. They're very, very comprehensive. This evening, staff will present the overview of the budget and our plan to perform existing services within our available resources. As with previous years, the budget document is organized around community priorities and result areas. The budget is the city's annual fiscal plan and the first year of a 5-year plan. This year's proposed resource budget totals $846 million and an expenditure budget of $736 million allocated to over 460 specific programs across 6 result areas. Presentations on these result areas will help inform and guide your deliberations and recommendations to City Council. Staff will be available tonight and over the upcoming meetings to provide more detail and to answer questions. Due to the amount of staff transition we've had over the last couple of years, though, in many cases, we may need to take your questions and follow up with answers at the next meeting or by email. As you've reviewed the materials, you will have noted that the revenues do not align with current or future costs of service delivery in several of our funds. And this shouldn't come as a surprise to folks. We've been talking about this misalignment for a number of years now. Over the last month, staff has been available for conversations with council and budget committee members to discuss this deficit in greater detail. Costs continue to outpace revenue, and we currently have an $8 to $9 million deficit to sustain our existing general fund services. We also have about $9 million in annual spending allocated from federal and state funds to support programs for the unsheltered, including 2 micro shelters, a community sanitation response team, a nonprofit work program, and a navigation center. These are one-time funds that will be fully expended in approximately 2 years, and there are currently no revenues identified to continue these services once the initial funding is exhausted. Salem is a full-service city operating police, fire, library, parks, land use planning and building, public works and utilities, recreation, economic development, the airport and homeless services, and core internal services like legal, finance, human resources, IT, facility, and fleet services. As a full-service city, we provide more services to the community than our peer cities, more than Beaverton, Bend, Eugene, Gresham, Hillsborough, Medford, and Portland. Eugene, which is often referred to as a comparable city when looking at programs like services for the unsheltered, has a much greater budget than Salem does, a higher number of employees per 1,000 residents, a greater tax base, and a higher tax rate. In Salem, our revenue resources are constrained due to the amount of acreage in the city not on the tax rolls, as well as the impacts of Measures 5 and 50, which capped the city's tax rate and limited the growth of assessed property value. There is a disconnect between the limited increase in revenue and the escalating costs of our services. As a result of these revenue constraints, we now have fewer staff in the general fund than we did back in 2008, while our population has grown by approximately 20,000 in the city and about 45,000, including the surrounding area. The number of staff we have to serve the community in the general fund has decreased from about 5.4 staff per 1,000 community members back in 2002 to about 5.1 in 2008 to about 4.4 today. From a staffing perspective, the organization is extremely lean and we've reached a tipping point. In the last 15 years, we have experienced an increase in regulatory requirements, added new services such as support services for the unsheltered, experienced an increasing number of disasters, and added facilities, parks, and infrastructure. These have all increased demand on staff time, but staff additions have not kept pace with the increased workload. The last 2 years in particular have had a tremendous impact on staff workload, burnout, and retention. The media has talked for years about the upcoming silver tsunami as baby boomers retire, and then more recently about the Great Resignation. We are experiencing both of these impacts to our workforce. Because we become so lean and efficient, and the staff so skilled at what they do, and all of the additional functions they've assumed over the years, when staff retire or leave, we are finding that in many cases, we can't replace them one for one. Employee recruitment and retention have become great challenges, particularly in this last year, and these cultural shifts are further impacting the city's general fund. We are now competing with a national, even a global market for employees. Benefits that were once extremely valuable in recruiting and retaining employees don't carry the same weight these days. PERS isn't what it used to be as a retirement benefit, and general private sector benefits, as well as extra benefits like bonuses and stock options, are attractive to the human resource, legal, IT, finance, engineering, and other professionals that we compete for. Employee costs are rising, and in many areas, they're rising largely due to factors that are beyond our control. So this is the framework that I want to set as we enter into consideration of this year's budget. Despite excellent staff and their good work, we are at a tipping point. We are as lean as we can be as an organization without significant investment in further automating some of our processes and services. Because we are so lean and having challenges filling vacancies, even without adding new positions, response times in serving the public are becoming slower. In the last few months, we have worked with every department to establish current staffing needs to perform existing services. We know that we need more funding for indigent defense and court-appointed attorneys and jail space. We know we need more staff in human resources to support an increasingly challenging recruitment and employment environment. We know we need more staff in our police and fire departments to respond to our growing community. We know we need more staff in our community development department to keep up with increasing development activity. We are facing challenges like these in every general fund department and service we provide. Cities around the state are in the same position, experiencing the same staffing, budgetary, and service level challenges. The way local government is currently funded is not sustainable into the future. This budget is not proposing new positions to meet current need. It is a status quo budget, nor are we proposing a reduction or elimination of services or presenting revenue solutions. A few years ago, the city developed a policy agenda process and moved towards priority-based budgeting to strategically guide discussion, consideration, and budgetary proposals to meet community, council, and organizational priorities and needs. Using this process to identify and vet issues with substantial policy or budgetary implications requires patience and discipline. Starting this July, we are modifying this process to visit the policy agenda with council on a quarterly basis rather than a couple of times a year. This will provide more frequent opportunities for council to review policy priorities and evaluate needs and associated expenditures throughout the year, ultimately leading into the budget decision-making process. With so many needs competing for limited general fund resources, this process helps frame decision-making in terms of trade-offs, rather than evaluating programs or staffing needs as standalone decisions. In a world with unconstrained resources, for example, we could consider adding more services for the unsheltered, more library hours, more IT systems, or more court-appointed defense attorneys, each as a discrete decision. But our reality is one of extremely constrained resources where every expenditure decision has an impact on other needs and priorities, and it must be made holistically and strategically to maximize the use of taxpayer dollars. While the needs I've addressed are both significant and urgent, the intent is to continue to work through the policy agenda process. At this time, staff seeks only to shine a light on these issues and create greater understanding and awareness. In the upcoming year, as we transition to a new city manager, a new mayor, and several new council members, we will be developing options and solutions to our fiscal sustainability challenges and our operational needs. And for those of you that have followed our budget over the years, I just want to point out that I managed to say all of that without mentioning the word cliff. With that, I will turn it back over to Josh.
Thanks, Kristen. I think at this time, if there's any questions for the manager.
Any questions? Yes, Member Phillips.
Okay, so thank you so much, Chair Stapleton and Interim City Manager Kristen Rutherford for that excellent summary. I guess since you brought it up at the end, when is the proverbial cliff? When do we hit that mark? Or Josh?
Yeah, I'll let Josh address that.
I'll refer back to our January meetings with the 5-year forecast. This year we increased costs. Costs went up, so the picture's a little bit worse than it was in January. Right now we're really focused on, the bond in the fall, so we're really focused on the capital side. We anticipate switching to that operating side, beginning next year, and that's why we're doing this prep work, building this context for this body and the city council. But the proverbial cliff. We're a couple of years out from where we're at a point where the general fund's at a dangerous level of fund balance.
Thank you, Josh.
If I could just add to that, we've been having a lot of these one-on-one or small group meetings with counselors and budget committee members. And as we've been talking about, the cliff, that we've been paralleling it and getting a little bit closer to it. But this last year, with the impacts on workforce, have definitely pushed us towards that much more rapidly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, if it's okay, Chair Stapleton. So I appreciate that. So what I'm hearing you say is we're okay. Things are a little worse than they were a few months ago, but we're okay through 2023. Are we also okay through 2024?
Good question, Member Phillips. And it really depends on this body. If the budget's passed without significant program changes, we're likely okay for fiscal year 2024. But depending on if there's other programs or other needs that come up, the picture could change, or as costs continue to escalate.
Thank you, Josh.
And can I clarify what okay means? Because right now, okay means that, we're not responding as quickly as we should with our police and fire. It also means that I know a lot of the other fellow counselors want to do more for our unsheltered, and we would not be able to, okay means doing what we're doing now, right? And I also want to say that that this was something we've known about and previous councils have tried to address and did so with really the great work of the operations fee, which helped a little bit. And we were moving forward with other things like the payroll tax, but then COVID happened. And so I want the public to know that this has been an ongoing conversation with council and really past counselors doing good work. And
I'll jump in here for a moment as Chair.
The needs are growing. Am I back now?
You are back. Sorry, you'd frozen for a moment.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I will stop talking because this is not a good place. But Member Milton.
Yeah, I'm hesitant on to bring this up, but I want to say maybe 6 months ago, maybe or so, or a little bit longer, Member Anderson, our Councilor Member Anderson brought up that this cliff seems to always be present. It never extends itself. It never seems to go away. Is this kind of one of those scenarios where it's here, it's still there, but it's still going to be there in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? And I remember how that, when Councilor Anderson brought that up, it kind of made me reflect going, you're right. This has been a conversation we've had for year over year over year, and it just seems to be the hot topic button, but it just never seems to go away. But we always make it through it.
I can speak to that unless Josh, did you want to jump in there?
I'd be happy to, but you're welcome.
Well, I would just say, and then Josh can add to it, that what you said is absolutely correct. And the reason that is correct is because of a lot of excellent staff work and decision making and action such as, when we've had many situations where when people have left the organization or people have retired, that we have not filled those positions. And we have instead spread that workload out over more individuals. The operating fee that went into place, that certainly helped for a while. And the reason that we are closer or at, what I'm referring to as a tipping point, because people kept telling me they didn't want to hear Cliff anymore, is that the pandemic has had a huge impact. We have added more services that we weren't performing in the past. Some of those with one-time funds, but we've also, we've got our homeless rental assistance program, things like that, where we are much more engaged in social services than we have been in the past as an organization for very important reasons. But then to compound that, we are also experiencing inflation and staffing changes that are harder to adjust to or respond to now in a really agile way because we are so thin at this point. You know, we have absorbed and thinned in the past to a point where we don't have that same capacity to respond in the same way anymore. And then Josh, please add anything you'd like to that.
Yeah, you know, just from a financial perspective, and this really is from a financial perspective, you know, it's not talking about that deferred need in the community, the need for more police or fire or other staffing. You know, so when I say we're okay, I'm talking financially. So we manage to that financial forecast, and that's really why it's always on the edge, right? So if there's additional fund balance, if there's revenue, you know, there's so many needs in the community. Programs are added to meet those needs in the community, or service, you know, needs expand. So you're always going to be on that edge of that fund balance need dropping. So if you have a little change, a little cost increase, it really throws havoc into that fund balance. You know, just those little changes add up quite quickly. But that's one of the reasons why we're always managing, and why the end of the forecast always doesn't look that great. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Members, I'm not sure who was up first here. Member Source, I believe.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Interim City Manager Rutherford. One of the things that I think we just really need to be honest with ourselves about is we're getting into the shelter game. We're doing more to help folks that the city hasn't been asked to do. We're stepping up more than we have in the past. And this isn't something we can really walk back from. And so when we're talking about a cliff or a tipping point, or however we want to explain it, I would challenge us and challenge staff to come up with some ideas of how to address that tipping point and that cliff, so that we can explain that to the members of the public, because these are all, like, every service that is in this budget are services that folks expect us to provide. And so it's just kind of the reality of the situation. I'm honestly a little bit surprised, and obviously this is no one's fault, but I'm a bit surprised that we aren't talking about options for revenue as part of this conversation. Maybe potential, obviously we have a levy that might be coming, or a bond that might be coming up for a vote, you know, in the future, and we want to focus on one thing at a time. But my question to you, and maybe you don't have an answer now, but is, what are some of the possibilities to kind of address that revenue cliff so that we can actually give folks providing critical services to the people of Salem some reassurance that those services aren't going to be pulled from under them once they finally start getting stabilized? And that's a concern that I hear, and I know I'm not alone on this committee, hear from residents every day. So, thanks.
Okay, Josh, you don't want to talk? You want to answer any questions?
I'm happy to address that question. So, you know, this body, this budget committee, recommended to the city council a couple of years ago to look at a revenue. So the Sustainable Services Revenue Task Force was formed, but it's been referred to before. You know, there were three options that came out of that, two that directly impacted the general fund. The first was the operations fee that has significantly helped. We'd be having a much different conversation. We'd be looking at a much different budget without that operations fee. So it's really, you know, there's two levers that you can pull, right? Expenditures and revenues. So that will be up to the council, the budget committee, to look at those options going forward and what that looks like. As far as the timing, you know, we have extreme capital needs as well as operating needs. You know, our fire apparatus is at the end of life, and we need to get those replaced. So, and if we don't replace them with a bond, it means we have to somehow absorb it in the general fund budget, which, you know, as you see it in front of you, there's no room to buy $26 million of fire equipment.
Thank you. Member Tigan?
Yeah, I just want to, I mean, we don't need to pile on to start our first meeting, but I do want to appreciate that the cliff or whatever, as Josh remarked, is the work of the budget. If we were taking in a bunch of revenue and not providing services to the residents of the city, that'd be its own sort of problem. But I think Interim City Manager Rutherford really captured it, and I'm glad this is what we're talking about from the outset, because I think it's the difficult question of this year's budget is the influx of federal dollars over the last 2 years has given us the opportunity to extend services that are needed in the city, but it has not given us the ability to continue those. And just speaking plainly about it in the budget committee is the work of the committee. So I'm glad we're having this conversation to start.
Thank you. Member Hoy?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. And this is sort of a question for Mr. Eggleston. The interim city manager referenced a significant portion of our land in the city that's not on the tax rolls. In my other capacity as a state rep, I seem to recall you and I having conversations about that very issue. And I was hoping that you could either correct or confirm my recollection that I think that the number is $2.1 billion worth of real market value that the state owns within the city limits, which translates to, if I'm not mistaken, $5.1 million out of our general fund every year that we don't receive because that land is state owned. Is that correct? And how does that compare to, say, a city like Eugene or something? Do you have any idea how that compares?
I'll answer your first question first. I believe in general it's correct. The one thing I will caveat is I don't believe state land is assessed quite as often as other land. So it could be undervalued, if anything. As far as the second part, we could come back with that comparison for state land. I know there are other jurisdictions that have significant state land as well, those with the universities especially. But that's something we can come back with if that's something the committee is interested in.
Thank you. And just to clarify in your comments, so what you're saying is 2.1 billion might be low. It actually might be higher than that. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Nordyke.
Thank you, everyone. I so appreciate the conversation. I've served on the budget committee for several years, and so I've certainly heard of the cliff before. And I appreciate the fact that year after year, the city staff have done a tremendously good job at finding ways to push out whatever that deadline is. It continues to get pushed out, and I've seen that happen many times before. And that did not happen by accident. That's due to prudent financial management by this city. And the city doesn't get enough credit for all that they've done to do so. That's one of the reasons why we have the second highest bond rating the city can get, which, trust me, translates into savings down the road when we want to take on big projects. And we all know that the city did an excellent job seeking reimbursement for COVID-related expenses. They held positions open during the pandemic. They did the things that we expect good financial stewards to do. So I encourage you, all members of the committee, as you go and talk to members of the public, remind them of the fact that the reason we're in the black today is because of how hard Josh and the entire finance office has done at keeping us in the black. Moving forward, I agree with Member Source that I would like to hear more about revenue options. Years ago, Mayor Bennett created a revenue task force, and it was composed of several members of the budget committee. I was not on that committee, but I really appreciate their work. One of the outcomes of that revenue task force was the proposal to enact the operations fee, which council did. So times have changed, and I think it's time that we revisit. Maybe it's time for us to either revisit ideas that committee already looked at, or perhaps to look at new ideas now that we're in a post-pandemic setting. Obviously, a lot has changed since the pandemic, so perhaps ideas that made perfect sense before 2020 don't make sense now. So I would love to see more conversation, opportunities to talk creatively about raising revenue. Another thing that I would like to see more of as we go through this process is an understanding of which city projects save us money. I know this might be crazy to some folks, but sometimes the government saves money. It's been known to happen. There are some government programs that create net savings for other departments. It's a thing. I know, because I'm in the government, but not this government, of course. That'd be a conflict. But in any event, it's important to remember that some of our programs, by doing them in-house, not contracting them out, save the city a bundle. There are other programs that we know from past budgetary talks and past talks at council that create net savings to the community. For those of you who participated in budget talks last year, we heard a lot from members of the community and from the data about how mobile crisis units can create net savings to the community by saving costly trips to the ER, by dispatching mental health specialists at a fraction of the cost as police officers who tend to be better paid. So as we move through this process, I just want us to be mindful that every project has an opportunity cost. Like interim manager Rutherford said, we need to consider the trade-offs more instead of looking at stuff in a vacuum. I applaud that. I think that makes perfect sense to me. I just want us to really be thoughtful about how we go through this process. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to serving with you this year.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. I'm the chair of the City Finance Committee and have been for, gosh, I would say 2 years. And we have on and off, and I think it will be more on in the future, been discussing other sources of revenue. I happen to think that the council should have imposed the employee payroll tax on its own and taken whatever heat they might have had to take for that. And I think the fact that the operating fee has been so helpful is another reason to do that. I will also say that other items that we have been discussing are a business license fee, which going to Commissioner Nordike's point, actually saves us some money because it helps us with planning. Where are the businesses? How can we best serve them? And then also, this is a minor point, but there's also something called the streetlight fee that has been imposed. And it's, to me, it's kind of skewed in favor of the bigger entities and individual homes on any kind of basis you look at it pay a whole lot more than a larger commercial and industrial and institutional users of the streetlights. So I think there are other things we have to look at, but I also think that we in the committee have been cognizant of this because we also recommended the much needed maintenance bond that is going to happen, is going to come up for a vote in November. And I think, that is something that the council and others need to spend a whole lot of time on because that has to pass. And it gets a little complicated to have all these balls juggled at one time. And the stuff that I've been talking about are ping pong balls, and the maintenance bond is a huge bowling ball, and that's the one we really have to look at.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any other questions? I apologize for my internet. We're having some weather over here as well, so it's adding to the dynamics here. But if there are no questions right now, there will be time for questions later, I'm sure, but we will move on. We do not have any public hearings But we do have a special order of business. And of course, Mr. Eggleston will be presenting overviews for us for all the results areas on the budget. In between result areas of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for the budget committee members to ask questions of staff and to discuss the result area budget information. Rather than introducing Josh each time, we will allow him to begin the next presentation when there are no further questions or discussion. So Josh, with that, would you like to go ahead and take over for?
I will. Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Hopefully you can see my screen. Good evening. Before we move into the result areas, I want to provide some context for the budget and budget document. Development of this budget was guided by the Council's strategic plan, which provides our mission, vision, and values, defines expectations of the Council and community framed within the policy priorities. The annual policy agenda, which is informed by input from residents and industry groups, transition from goals into actions that can be supported in the upcoming fiscal budget. The policy agenda relies on continuous feedback through resident satisfaction surveys, city boards and commissions, neighbor associations, and testimony at city council and budget committee meetings. The role of the budget committee is integral to this annual cycle, as the committee receives the budget proposal from the city manager, provides those opportunities for community feedback at committee meetings, sets the property tax levy each year, and makes a budget recommendation to the city council. This display shows the city's total expenditure budget of $736 million broken into the 6 results areas. This does include construction funds, which makes safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure the biggest result area, followed by safe community and good governance. The budget display converts hundreds of line item entries into programs and aligns those programs with results the community cares about. The goal of priority-based budgeting is to ensure resources are being applied to the highest and best use to achieve those results. In the budget, each result area is set off by a tab with the result area name and icon. To allow us to compile the budget publication, each program has been assigned a home result area. Each tab section lists across multiple pages as the program is assigned to that result area. The alignment column describes programs as most, more, less, and least aligned with the overall result areas, not the specific result area it's in. A less or least alignment doesn't mean the city can or should stop providing the service, or that it's not important or valued. The less or least score could mean that the program has a strong or essential influence in only a single result area. There could also be federal or state mandates that require the city to have the program. On the right, the check marks indicate an influence anywhere from minor to essential in each of the result areas. The program details include the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget, as well as the current year adopted budget for comparison. New this year, each program displays the prior year position count, as well as the count for the proposed budget. Throughout our scheduled budget committee meetings, we will highlight changes and initiatives within each result area. Tonight we'll be covering Welcome Livable Community and Natural Environment Stewardship. The Welcome Livable Community Service area starts on page 159 of your budget book, and Natural Environment Stewardship begins on page 75. Welcome Livable Community is the first area for review this evening. The result area total budget is $58.5 million, and there are 128.7 full-time equivalent positions within the result area's programs. Program pages for the result area provide a further breakdown of services and positions. The City Council added 7 full-time positions during fiscal year 2022 with proposed funding through a state sheltering grant. I'll cover more on that on the next slide. Also, as a result of the February 2021 ice storm, as we previously talked about, the city received insurance proceeds to fund a tree replanting program. There are 3 limited duration positions that were added during fiscal year 2022 in order to begin the program as soon as possible. In addition, the Urban Development Department replaced a limited duration position with a full-time permanent position focused on federal programs. The position is necessary to quickly and successfully distribute funds into the community while meeting federal reporting requirements in an accurate and timely manner. For the first time in the budget book is the Community Sanitation Response Team, which is a cross-departmental work group approved by the City Council and added fiscal year 2022 mid-year. The team consists of the 7 positions across 3 departments that will provide cleaning services, notification of alternative sheltering locations, and staff to maintain safety for our private property owners during trespassing enforcement. Additionally, the city continues to support the Homeless Rental Assistance Program administered by the Salem Housing Authority for a 5th year in a row. The amount budgeted for next year is $885,000 and reflects current program limitations caused by caseloads and rental inventory in Salem. The program provides 12 months of rental assistance, funding for security deposits, and intensive care, case management, and more. The Public Art Fund is getting an increase in allocation for maintenance of the city's public art collection, increasing from 0 in fiscal year 2022 to $25,000 in the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget. This program is funded through a transfer from the Cultural and Tourism Fund that's funded with Transient Occupancy Tax. And it's typically $10,000 due to reduced revenues in that year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The transfer was suspended for 1 year. There will also be a public art capital project. The project is funded through community donations and a top contribution and will consist of design and construction of and rehabilitation of the Echo Earth Globe at Riverfront Park. This concludes my presentation on this results area. Staff are available for questions on the Welcome and Livable Community result area now.
Are there any questions? And I'm sure we can circle back if you come up with something later. Oh, here we go. Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about the transient occupancy tax. I was wondering, how does the city of Salem compare to other cities with that tax rate?
Excellent question. If I may, we'll come back to that one at our next meeting when we're covering strong and diverse economy. We'll make sure to include that information. This is a very small piece of the Cultural Tourism Fund. The larger portion is next week. And we'll have that detail for you.
Great, thank you. Member Shrock?
Thank you. On page 169, there's a little short blurb about a code enforcement officer will be moved from the general fund supported code enforcement section to building and safety division. Also, that's within community development. So my question is, what's the on the ground impact of that move? With my work with neighborhood associations, and I hear this from a lot of neighborhood associations, not just my own, code enforcement to take care of neighborhood complaints, then it may range from, high weeds, broken windows, illegal signs. So there's the sign code enforcement as well as zoning code enforcement is like one of the number one type of neighborhood concerns and complaints. And a lot of people want to see more code enforcement officers, just like we hear, people wanting more of other types of staff too. But so what was the purpose of that, and what will we be paying as much attention as we have in the past to respond to neighbor complaints about things going on in their neighborhood that they see as eroding quality of life?
Thank you. That's a good question. I see Director Wright here. Would you like to address that?
Yes, certainly, Madam Chair. So there is no actual impact or change to the service itself. What is occurring here is that we have a Blight to Bright program that focuses on remediating and mitigating blighted and dilapidated structures. That program is funded through our Building and Safety program, and the officer who manages that program has been up until this coming proposed budget been stationed with the Code Compliance Division. But our idea here is to align that position with the rest of the program that is funded in Building and Safety and continue those same services as they currently exist. So this is really an alignment of the funds, the budget, the revenues from that program with the actual division that produces it, which again is Building and Safety. So the service will continue as it currently exists.
May I just ask a follow-up?
Yes.
So will the funding for that code enforcement officer that was transferred not be general fund? It'll use another funding source?
Yeah, it's a good question. In all of the past years that we can look back, this position has always been funded through Building and Safety. So there's no change in the actual general funding that's dedicated to code compliance officers. There's instead just a shift, whereas this funding has always been from Building and Safety, but had been sent to code compliance, the division itself. It'll now stay in Building and Safety, and the position will go instead to that division too. So no decrease in the funding for these officers either.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Source?
Thank you, Chair. I got two questions. One is about abandoned and junk vehicle enforcement on 170. It seems like this is an issue that's been, it's become like a bigger and bigger issue in parts of our community. And it looks like you're increasing the budget like a couple hours, basically staffing time a couple hours for enforcement on that. And can we just talk a little bit more about what this program does for folks in Salem and some of the challenges that this program is facing? Is that an appropriate question for here, or is that maybe another time kind of deal?
It's the perfect time for that question, but just real quick, and I'll turn it over to you, Norm. We do, in addition to this program in the Community Development Department, we do have $200,000 allocated within the unsheltered programs for towing, specifically targeted to abandoned RVs and abandoned vehicles. So there's more resources being allocated than you're seeing on this page on 170.
And true to the comments that have been offered, yes, we are seeing a significant increase and have for a while in the total cases from abandoned vehicles, junk vehicles. Those are two different things, technically speaking, but the impact is certainly the same. We have all of our code compliance officers dedicated to this issue. In fact, it's taken up a significant amount of their caseload compared to past years. And with the money that has been dedicated, the $200,000 that Josh mentioned, we are hoping to mitigate, to remove from the streets, and to demolish as many as 35 to 40 of those vehicles in the coming year. We do face a bottleneck, though, when it comes to dealing with these situations. For all the additional resources that we now have, as well as all of our code officers working on this, it's very, very challenging to find tow companies that can not only tow these vehicles, but also demolish them so that they are not repurchased and then brought back onto the streets. And so a significant amount, if not all of that $200,000 that Josh has mentioned that will be dedicated to our budget is going to be spent in paying a premium towards whatever tow contractor we can find that will take these, not only towing them from the streets, but also demolishing them as well. That's been a key piece to trying to deal with this issue. And there is, again, a real constraint there because there are just not that many contractors who can take this on in our city while also taking it on in others. So this is a persistent issue for us. It is an all hands on deck response. We do have this additional funding that Josh mentions, and we've got a game plan ahead. We're doing our best to implement it as we can.
All right, thank you. And Madam Chair, if I can ask one more, I know I've asked a lot of questions.
No, you're good, but can I ask one question about these RVs? Norm, do we have an estimate of how many we have in the city right now? Sorry, I'm breaking up.
No. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. In terms of cases, it's probably about 60% of our cases. as I remember, I believe we have at least 40 or 50 that are currently impounded. And we're at a point now where the lots are so full and the demolitions are so far behind that we can't get to additional ones on the streets. And so active cases on the streets are probably as high as what we see dealt with in the impound lots. So the ballpark here, I'm going to just stay conservative though and say it's 40 or 50. We'll get new numbers next month.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Member Source, you want to go ahead with your second question?
Yeah. So real quick, thanks, Norm, appreciate it. Second question is about the community sanitation response, and kind of a two-part, but really most important is this a matching grant? So this is like Salem's part of it, because if I remember correctly, the state freed some money to the city for this service as well, correct?
If I could clarify, the initial grant we're using for this is actually a $10.5 million grant for state sheltering.
Okay.
Later on in the session, this last session, there was additional funds allocated, but we haven't dedicated those funds to this service quite yet. We haven't received the grant funds yet.
Okay, and then is there a reason why it's divided into three parts, the sanitation response? Are those specific for different kinds of activity, or is it kind of like an all hands kind of response with all three of those departments working together for each call?
Good question. And just for the display, it's simply for recognizing there's three departments involved. But for the actual service, I can let Gretchen respond to that. Gretchen, if you're willing.
Hi, Madam Chair and members of the team. My name is Gretchen Bennett, and I'm on the staff team at the City Manager's Office. And that's correct. We expect to be at the service of the location and the response and tap the individual people that are going to be necessary. There'll be times when this unit will work as a team. There'll be times when they'll work separately. We want to do what's indicated for that particular location.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Tigan?
I wanted to ask a couple questions about the HRAP program. I wonder if this is the best time, or if we would be discussing the managing homelessness within the city at a more consolidated time than this, Josh.
This is the right results area.
Okay, so I guess my first question is the funding going into HRAP this year. Is it from the general fund, or is it sourced out of ARPA or some other one-time source?
The HRAP program has always been funded just with general fund resources and continues to be.
And I can't remember if it was you, Mr. Eggleston, or Interim City Manager Rutherford, who kind of gave us the reason for we're funding it at a significantly less rate than we have in the past, this $885,000 instead of, in the past, maybe it's been 1.3 or 1.4, I think. Can you characterize what the bottleneck is? And also, I think some of that money's sitting in a pot to be used. How big is the pot from the 5 years that we've put funds into it that we're adding $885,000 this year?
I will let Josh speak to the pot first, and then I'll come back and speak to bottleneck and the use.
So just real quick for clarification, the original program was $1.4 million, and it's actually been quite a bit lower in recent years, in the $500,000 range. So this is actually an increase. And then as far as the pot, there's really not a pot. How it works is there's cohorts. So what you do is you might start the program like for next year, but people don't enter the program on day one. They might enter it, month 2, 3, 4, all the way till the end of the year. So you always have this overlap of the cohorts. So you're going to have a carryover amount. So this May, the city council is going to see a request from me to carry over funds for what's left over from this year's pot to carry it over into next year. So there's no big pot of money. It's just assigned to a cohort and follows them along.
Okay, and then regarding the some of the bottlenecks. The reason that we've seen changes in how much we allocate or are able to expend over the last few years, part of that is tied to the pandemic. Part of it is tied to the way that this program was structured initially, which focused, from the time we were standing it up, it was focused on the hardest to house individuals in the community based on a scoring and ranking system through the intake process. And then it was a scattered site model. So we would have folks that would enter a cohort, and then we would find housing for them in the community and then provide wraparound resources when they were in these diverse locations around the community. We have, since the program started, opened up Redwood Crossings, where a number of individuals are, and we're able to have those supportive services on site. So what we were having challenges with is finding units out in the community. And then this was all compounded by the pandemic. Because there were eviction moratoriums, there weren't as many units that were opening up, meaning that there were fewer units available for HRAP clients. So not saying that the moratorium was a bad thing, it's just there's normally a certain amount of churn in a marketplace that creates availability and open units that we weren't seeing. It also was harder to work with individuals during the pandemic, in part because retaining case managers to do that kind of outreach became more difficult. We've had quite a bit of turnover there. So given the decrease in availability in scattered sites, the decrease in staff or difficulty retaining staff, and the amount and complexity of delivering wraparound services in multiple locations rather than in a single development or a couple of developments, it's just been hard to maintain the same level of service provision as we did the first couple of years of the program. So that's why the budget needs have decreased.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Any more questions? Those were all really good. Oh, we have, okay, Stacy, what do you got?
I have a quick question just for my own understanding. The staff reports or the staff totals that are listed, are those distinct FTEs? For example, if there's like 0.45 associated with something for the library, is that a distinct position, or is the other 55% of that person's position doing something else?
Yeah, great question. So those, they could be multiple portions of FTE, but they represent distinct portions of FTE, if that makes sense. So they're called a time study, and then they're allocated to programs. So you might see a 0.2, but it could be made up of 3 different people at a lower amount.
Thank you. And then I had one other question. I'm just curious with some of the information that's in here about parks projects and some of the public works projects, if any of that has the potential to be funded through the bond measure as well?
Good question. I'll let Peter address that.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director. So any capital project can be paid for with the bond. It's really just, the needs are very substantial. So there are other projects that are proposed in the bond measure. The council subcommittee has finished their work, and that will be coming to the council soon for discussion, where those projects are laid out. There's about $28 million worth of parks projects in the proposed bond measure.
Thank you.
Member Nordike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to piggyback on that. I think Member Vieta Brendel touches on a great point, which is we've got this whole other bond measure thing going on in the background. And I know that as a member of council, I'll be receiving information on what that proposal is, and I'll have opportunities to weigh in. will there be a comparable process for our public budget committee members to learn what's going to be available in a potential bond measure? Because that could impact how we spend our money here. So I'm just curious, in the course of our future meetings, is this budget committee going to be hearing about the proposed bond measure with, you know, a breakdown for 28 million for parks, this much money for such and such? I'm just, you know, I think it would be helpful for our public budget committee members to know what else is going on that could have a budgetary impact.
A good question. We could definitely provide it as information. It is a policy issue for the council. So that recommendation is going to council, but we could definitely do an update at next week's meeting when we're talking about construction funds, just on the general makeup of that recommendation. I should note that it hasn't gone to the full council, so it's still, you know, I would call it a draft proposal at this point, but we could give an update.
Right, and I understand it's a council decision, but I think the budget committee members are already doing a deep dive with us on the budget. When I was a public member, that's the sort of thing that I would like to know, and, you know, have opportunities to provide input like any member of the public on something as important as a $300 million bond. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here? Okay, Josh, you want to handle the next one for us?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. The next result area for review for the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget is the Natural Environment Stewardship. Programs for this result area are managed by the Public Works Departments and focus on environmental compliance, monitoring, and education. The program pages begin on page 75 and provide a further breakdown of services and positions. The Natural Environment Stewardship result area is just over 21.2 million in proposed funding with 4 major program groupings. There are 93.8 full-time equivalent positions within this result area's programs. For workforce changes, the utility fund is adding 2 full-time positions to this result area. One of these positions will help with monitoring requirements for municipal storm sewer system or MS4 permit required by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. The second position that will be added is to help with the general maintenance of increasing public-owned stormwater facilities. The proposed fiscal year 2023 budget includes funds for the initial implementation of the Climate Action Plan for the City of Salem in the amount of $200,000, rebudgeted from a contingency transfer that the City Council approved earlier this month. Additionally, the successful street tree planting program will continue on for a 5th year in fiscal year 2023. Strategically planted trees in the city public rights-of-way and city-owned properties improve the quality of life for residents, as well as increase the tree canopy in Salem. This tree canopy will reduce the stormwater runoff, lower stream temperatures, and improve the water and air quality. The program is funded through stormwater rates and includes the planning, planting, and monitoring of trees in a 3-year establishment period with evaluation and reporting. And just for clarity, not to confuse it with the ice storm funds, this is a separate program. And with that, staff are available for questions on the Natural Environment Stewardship results area.
Thank you, Josh. Member Hoy?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton, and thanks, Josh. I was curious, Mr. Fernandez, if the program that Josh just outlined, does that include the money for the trees on the private property? I know we started a program earlier this year in one neighborhood. I'm wondering if that's going to continue and if that's going to expand.
So, Councilor Hoy, I think the program is to plant trees in the public rights-of-way adjoining private property in residential areas. I'm drawing a blank. I see your reaction. I'm drawing a blank if you're talking about something else.
I think we had a pilot program in NOLA where we were planting trees on private property for people and we were helping them with them. That's the program I'm asking about, unless I completely misunderstood that program.
I'll come back to you on that one. I got a couple of people around me and we're all sort of like, man, could it be this? Could it be that? So if we get an answer before tonight, I'll chime back in.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So, my apologies.
had a quick question. There was, I saw the 200,000 for the climate action plan, but there were no FTEs associated with that. Could you talk to us about what that $200,000 is going to get us?
Certainly, Councilor. What we're looking at, we have one staff person assigned to lead the effort. It's Heather Dimke, who's our management analyst here in the director's office. She will be coordinating and the effort and staffing the council subcommittee. The 200,000 is there. There's bound to be consulting efforts, additional studies, the implementation process. So that's just a little money that we've set aside to be able to address those kinds of issues as we get started with implementing the programs.
Great, thank you so much. Member Source?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. My question's around the environmental monitoring and specifically the harmful algal blooms monitoring. Sorry, I don't know why I have a hard time saying that word, but that increased funding or that funding there, does that include the public information, the public facing information on our website around toxic levels and whether the water is safe or unsafe, kind of going back to the conversation a few years ago?
Yeah, the cost to provide that kind of information is really pretty minimal. So the costs are in the testing that we do. We have some pretty rigorous testing protocols that we've created in terms of, as we start to see the increase in toxins up in the reservoir and the river, then we increase the testing sites around the plant to make sure that we're catching them. We see them come into the plant and we're testing at every step of the way. Each test is like $1,200 just in materials. So it's a very expensive proposition. So that increase in protocol that we've self-imposed is where those increases are.
Thank you.
Member Cohen?
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. The first one is about the fats, oil, and grease program. Is this more of a for the members of the city's restaurants? Is it like their information, or is this something that code compliance can go forward and cite them for damaging our sewer systems that we have in Salem? The second question revolves around wastewater spillage. I noticed several times from the Statesman Journal, they reported that City of Salem had several wastewater spillages into the Willamette River or other various bodies of water in the city. What is the department doing to assess that? And does the decrease in the green stormwater infrastructure maintenance play a role in that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Member Cohen. So to your question on the FOG program, fats, oils, and grease, we do extensive review and checking on the commercial side, the restaurant side. The vast majority of restaurateurs are actually very good about that. Our biggest issue with FOG is from apartment buildings, where those are harder to reach customers, and so there's just a lot of outreach about not pouring grease down the drain, because it is the cholesterol of our system. So it's really at this point more outreach than anything else for that process. Towards your second question, that relates to sewer system overflows, SSOs. I think there's a number here. We had 19 this past year. So we really see two kinds of sewer system overflows. One kind is when we have significant storm events, and our sewer system, we've known for decades, is very leaky. So while in the summertime we'll treat about 35 million gallons a day, in the winter after storms we might exceed our capacity. Our capacity to treat is 200 million, and we can exceed that. And so we end up spilling into the Willamette, or we'd be backing sewage into basements and onto the street. So our permit I don't want to say allows for that, because the DEQ obviously doesn't want, and nor do we want any SSOs, but our permit and our regulators understand that at some point the system is overflowing. So it is sewage. It is highly dilute because it's a lot of rainwater. There is another kind of SSO, and that is when we overflow a manhole, and that is typically caused by fog. For example, the system just gets clogged, or there's debris that's gotten into the system. So either a combination or separately, we have natural debris, small logs, that kind of thing, that creates a blockage, and then as the sewer backs up, it spills out onto the street. You'll see it in the newspaper because we are required to report every single one of them, no matter how small. And we do. We're diligent about that reporting. We're diligent about cleaning them up. Our goal is 0, but this past year we had 19. And it has nothing to do, and I guess to your last question, it really has nothing to do with the green stormwater infrastructure. That is separate, and that is for our stormwater and our sewer system are separate. So stormwater runs in its own infrastructure, and wastewater runs separately, even though rainwater and groundwater leaks into it.
Thank you. Director Fernandez, I had a quick question for you about your answer you provided, Evan, about the cyanotoxin testing. With all of our new amazing infrastructure out there, is there a reason why we are testing if we know that the system will take care of it anyway?
Yeah, belts and suspenders. So we just so we have not taken down our powdered activated carbon system yet. We got plenty of the carbon piled up at Guerin Island. We have our system ready. We are just getting started with ozone. And right, $45 million. We want to make sure that it works, but just in case, we just don't want to go back through another 2018 again.
Okay.
So as we become more comfortable in operating ozone and we see that it's working properly, then we might reduce. We ask ourselves that question about reducing the testing, perhaps not maintaining our powdered activated carbon, but we're not ready to sell that insurance policy yet.
Yeah, I understand. That was an interesting time for all of us. So
yes, it was. Very painful time.
Yes, thank you. Member Chirac.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Having to do with the tree canopy issues, I'm feeling fairly comfortable with the city's progress in replacing trees from the ice lost in the ice storm with the insurance funds, as well as making slow progress planting new trees with volunteers and the Friends of Trees contract. But on the enforcement side, which Laura and Lynn from NIN, part of their concern was the need to better enforce our tree codes. So, and especially with the extension affecting significant trees on private property, how are any complaints or concerns or flags raised about trees possibly being or going to be taken out? Are all the complaints currently received able to be responded to? Do we have the staff to respond to all complaints that come in before the trees are actually cut down that out of compliance, that for whatever reason? So what is our staffing ability to respond?
Yeah, so private property compliance is actually in community development compliance services. So perhaps Director Wright can speak to it. I will say, well, he popped on real quick, but I will say to preamble his response that we take that issue very seriously, and every single complaint is investigated, and we move on it just as quickly as possible. So Norm, I've handed you the softball.
Yeah, that is a softball. Thank you, Peter. We do the same. We certainly take every one of these complaints seriously and do our best to respond to them in a timely manner. Earlier, Councilor Stapleton, Madam Chair Stapleton, asked the question about our junk vehicle and abandoned vehicle program and our cases there. I just want to say that, as you can tell in what we talked about there, that is one type of case that we deal with that has to do with health, safety, and welfare on a very immediate standpoint. And then our tree issues, as important as they are, unfortunately, they have to be prioritized slightly lower given the nature of the risk that we entail with that type of case versus what we see with abandoned vehicles. My point here in saying this is that, yes, when it comes to those tree violations, whether it be some amount of unpermitted cutting especially, we get to those as best as we can in a very expedient fashion, but we do have to also triage out in the field with the variety of other cases that we're dealing with on a regular basis, particularly, again, those abandoned vehicles, those junk vehicles, trash, junk and debris, dilapidated structures, blighted structures, et cetera. So we have made great strides, I think, really in the past year, notably on several tree cases, and continue to deal with this on the private side as best as we can. But it is regrettably a second priority item for us with the broad canvas of what we have to deal with in the community. Does that help to answer the question, or is there more that I can share?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me, no, that gives me a sense of the adequacy of our response. Maybe the only related question, I guess, is are fees, or fines rather, are fines that are collected from illegal tree removal or removal from public property, public right-of-way as well as private property, are those anywhere near sufficient to fund, say, 1 FTE for the purposes of compliance? Or just roughly, would they fund 10%, 50%, 90%? Just so I kind of have a ballpark. And I know the fines have been controversial. Some can be quite high, some maybe not so high. So what's your view on that?
As it stands now, between our fine assessments, which are established by statute and are enforced through a process with the courts, that is certainly, I think, very effective at preventing or at least creating a lot more credence for our rules, and I think it's certainly got a lot of attention out in the community, to say the least. We also have other ways in which we try to prevent these type of things from occurring, especially when it comes to new development with our new and improved tree ordinance. To go back to I think the core of your comments there, the money that we collect from fines, particularly as it relates to private trees being illegally cut and the penalties that are then assigned to that activity, those liens go into a lien account. Collection on those fines can take quite some time. There's a significant amount that goes into that process, whether it be paying it off from the guilty parties or a lien placed on a property at its future sale. And so effectively all of that money from those liens that are collected over time, or those fines and forfeitures, are reinvested through our Blight to Bright program. So I can't create and draw a direct line from fines collected for tree penalties to, say, additional trees being funded in the community, but I can draw a correlation between those type of revenues coming in being dedicated to the clearance of blighted structures in the community, which is effectively another reinvestment of a certain kind that I think definitely helps us in the end get to a more welcoming and livable community. So there is a connection, and I think those fines, those penalties that come from that type of activity is producing, I think, some positive results for us in the community, and I think we're in a good place there. I hope that illustrates a little bit of how it works, and we've certainly seen progress in the past year.
If I may, just real quick, we generally don't make connections to cost recovery when we're talking about fines or violations or anything like that. It's really, we'd like the compliance. The fee is just to get that compliance. So we're not looking to fund programs with fines in general. if we're talking police, code enforcement, we don't make that cost recovery connection.
Thank you. Director Fernandez, I was wondering if maybe now is a good time, if you can hear me still, for you, sorry, for you to address the questions about how our urban forestry department is funded. Could you address that?
Yeah, sure. Street tree maintenance is funded by allocations of the gas tax. So we move money over to fund that. But then there's another component to the urban forestry program, which is the parks trees, and then that is funded through the general fund. So it is a combination. And then I talked earlier about the 3 limited duration employees. So we do have an increase, basically another, a third crew that is going to handle a lot of the restoration work, and that will be funded from the reimbursement from the insurance. So that's where the monies are generally coming from.
Great, thank you so much.
And if I may, Councilor Stapleton, to respond to Councilor Hoy's first question. So page 91, thanks to like 6 different people that that texted us and found it for us. So on page 91 of the budget book, it does speak to our pilot program that we're going to be implementing with Friend of Trees, and we're primarily looking at planting trees in front yards. So that would add in essence to the street tree canopy, but these would be, as you mentioned, off right of way, in private property. So it's a pilot. We did a survey to kind of get a sense of what people would like to see, and we'll be working on that and see if people want to accept the trees and then grow the canopy that way.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could follow up on that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. I guess my question was, are we going to expand that program beyond NOLA? And just some of the feedback that I received from NOLA is that they didn't feel like our outreach was as effective as it could have been. So I think there may be more people who are interested in taking part in that program, but they just didn't know. They didn't read the postcard or whatever. And so I think if we do continue it and expand it, we ought to work on our outreach some more. But yeah, the question is, are we going beyond NOLA?
Yeah, well, I think we want to start with, I'll have to get you back, the proper information. My sense is that we'd want to see the success there, and if we need to do more outreach, we'll do more outreach, and then learn our lessons in NOLA before we move on. I will point out that it's that part of town is the part of town that is in need of more canopy. So we are starting where canopy is most needed. So I would assume that we would proceed from NOLA to other adjoining neighborhood association areas where canopy is where increases in canopy is the most needed.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have to have an answer tonight. Just if you could follow up, that'd be awesome. Just to know what the future of that program is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really great program. I'm excited to see how it moves forward, and excited for NOLA, but then also as we expand it across the city, I think it's going to be really great. Member Varney.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. My question is for Director Fernandez, but first of all, I wanted to mention the pilot project for planting trees in private yards. I assisted with the project. We planted three trees in folks' front yards, and there was a lot of interest, but again, there was a lack of education and just getting the word out, but there was a lot of excitement. People were coming up from the neighborhood going, why are you planting trees in this private yard? And then I was explaining the program and we were explaining it. So yeah, I think a bit of outreach is in order, but folks were pretty excited about it. So my question is about environmental monitoring. Let's see, with the importance of us with the climate action plan, and it's really important that we implement environmental monitoring as we look into the implementation of strategies in the climate action plan so that we have a metric to evaluate how certain strategies are working. So I guess my question I had was on page 78 in the budget book on the service area statistics, there's a description of water quality monitors used for modeling water quality trends, and it says it's 10 of them. Are those temp meters, or what do they measure? Do they measure temperature? And the reason I'm asking is because of also the plans to address the total maximum daily load for temperatures and the plans the city's putting into place. Are we going to purchase a whole bunch of temperature monitors? Because I really think that would be helpful, especially as we look at whether increasing riparian area, protecting wetlands, et cetera, and seeing the impacts on the actual stream temperature.
Yeah, so our water monitoring stations are permanent stations. They're automatic at different locations for streams, and they measure a whole bunch of stuff. So temperature and pH and other pollutants. The system that's been established, it's actually been established for a number of years. So we have quite the data set there. And then I also want to mention that, and it's not in this program, but we also do extensive monitoring up at our watershed, where we actually sometimes we get complaints because people see a City of Salem truck pulling a boat up to the reservoir, and they think we're going fishing, and we're actually going up there to monitor. And so we take samples up there, and we monitor for a number of different constituents, including most importantly the algae and the toxins. So we're actually monitoring in a lot of different places and for a lot of different things. So we also we've really developed our GIS resources over the last few years, and that group is just doing a great job of mapping information and putting it in data sets that we can use and then be able to track.
Can I just add on? I just wanted to stress the importance of getting some temperature readers out, because we have so many streams in Salem all over the place, and the temperature it does seem to be increasing in them, which is harmful on our fish and our aquatic organisms. So that's why it's important to me to be able to monitor those as well.
Right. And temperature is definitely one of the things that the monitoring stations pick up.
Thanks.
I really like having a biologist on our list, our people here to ask questions, Member Varney. And I guess a question for that, a follow-up is, would there be any reason why we at the council level would ever hear about issues like that as they build or before they become an emergency? Does that make sense?
In pre-COVID times, we would do an annual presentation of our stream cleaning crew would put a presentation together, and we'd invite the public, and in years past, we would actually do presentations at the council. And, so we talk about the health of the streams and that kind of thing. And we will need to bring that back. Those were very popular presentations, and we haven't done them in the last couple of years because of the whole COVID thing, but that's something that we would want to bring back. And that is the opportunity to really understand the health of our streams and what the crews did to clean them up and what we're finding and those kinds of things.
Yeah, for one, as a city councilor, I think that would be really great. I'd love to hear that, and it would be a really good test to see how we're doing on climate action as a whole, and how we're good stewards in that way. I mean, I don't know how many streams we have going through here, but it seems a really important part of our city. So thank you for that. Member Phillips?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Fernandez. I think I'm going to be at risk of being a bit redundant. I just want to make sure I understand the point and process where we are. So, more comments, but there are questions. So it's been brought up recently, I think, on this topic that there's some community concern regarding the appropriateness of fines for the against the rules removal of significant trees. Some that have already happened in my ward, and then moving forward. I've certainly had constituents express their opinion, widely held opinion, multiple people, near unanimous at neighborhood meetings, that the fees are inadequate and that they haven't served as the compliance in achieving the compliance that we're looking for, which is the primary goal. So I understand that, this is a budget meeting tonight and that these, fines don't really get added to our dollars for budgeting purposes. So if the community members, budget members, or as a city councilor, we have concerns that those fees are inadequate and some, entities choose to just chalk them up as kind of the cost of doing business in a way that we as a city don't agree with, how is the best way to address that? Like, is it really outside of the purview of the budget meeting? Is it more like policy and emotion at council? How do we proceed on that issue specifically?
Yeah, I don't know if the city attorney is on the call tonight, but setting fines is really a council issue, and those were updated not that long ago, but it'd be good for the council to understand that, and they are substantial, the fines. So the council could review those and decide if they need to be even more substantial.
Thank you.
Dan, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, since I got my camera on, I'll go ahead and say it. Thank you, Peter. Dan Atchison, City Attorney. I mean, setting the fines obviously would be a council policy issue, and Director Fernandez is correct that this issue was addressed fairly recently. Doesn't mean council can't revisit it and determine whether the fines that are being imposed are adequate enough to provide deterrence.
Thank you. One of my questions about that is, how have we communicated this change in policy with our community? Because, folks need to understand if there's been a change, you wouldn't want somebody to make a decision and then be hit with a pretty steep fine. So I would be interested to know how we've handled that with the recent changes. Member Nordyke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question related to this. In order to enforce the fines, you need staff to enforce the fines. And again, this could be an opportunity where sometimes you have to spend money to make money. And I'm wondering, maybe Mr. Wright, our Community Development Director, others can tell us, do you have in this budget, do we have enough people to enforce these rules on the books? Because if we have enough people to do enforcement, the fines don't matter if there's no one out there enforcing rules. And I just want to get a sense of where we are at in terms of the adequate staffing levels needed to police our tree rules for a city of this size.
Yes, Councilor Nordyke. So when it comes to the trees and the violations we find there, I'm trying to off the top of my head, remember the number of cases we get on a monthly basis. I would say that within every given district, we likely respond adequately to the tree complaints that we receive, with maybe a few exceptions here and there when it comes to certain cyclical events like what we saw with the ice storm, the private violations that we see on private property, those do get an adequate response at this point in time. Where we see our greatest challenges are in our higher priority cases. So if there are areas where we are unable to meet the demand, it's in these higher priority needs that we spoke about earlier.
So in other words, do you feel that we have enough staff to respond to enforcement?
Not to all cases that we receive, but certainly to our top priorities on levels 1 and 2. There's a third level of priority that, in my experience, across the country, we've never had enough staff in any place to be able to respond to. This would be the sort of things that you see in the summertime, things like tall grass. That is a very legitimate need, but we never have enough staff to cover it, and that's been the case again across the country. But when it comes to overall total demand, we can always have, yes, one or two more code officers for sure. But for the demands we see right now, for the demands we've seen historically with our data for the past 2 years, we do very well with what we do have. I'm a little bit vague in the answer, as you can see, but really and truly, we are still working out efficiencies. We're still streamlining our processes. And so then I know that there's more that we can do to gain more productivity on that side too.
Thank you. And ultimately, my question is aiming at, does it make sense to hire more people? Would they pay themselves through additional fines or not? And I know that requires, a little bit of a crystal ball. And I didn't give you any advance notice to this question. So if there's something you want to, mull over and consider, you don't have to give me a final answer now, of course, but I'm interested now what positions might benefit us financially in some respects, in addition to enforcing the rules on the books.
Yeah, certainly. So great question. And the answer I can say with about 95% confidence is that we would not be able to develop, I don't think, a fine and fee scheme that would be able to offset the cost on a consistent basis for a code officer. I don't see how we'll be able to do that. One of the reasons is that, to go back to the trees for an example, even as council considers policy direction that could raise the rate, the potential ceiling on a fine for, say, an illegally cut tree, our staff are still bound to a very precise methodology for assessing the type of fee, or excuse me, the type of fine that we will issue for a given case. And that fine can vary quite a bit based on the methodology and a set number of criteria. And so there's a lot of variability, in other words, even with the highest possible ceiling of fines issued being raised. And because of that variability, and because of what I think we would see with greater awareness over time, as we're already seeing, there are more people talking about trees now and private tree penalties than I think I can remember in all of my 5 years being here. Because of all of that, I think we would actually see a reduction over time, and then we would not be able to sustain an adequate revenue stream in order to offset the cost of that person. It would be a good problem to have, certainly, but I feel about 95% confident that there would not be a way to offset those costs through fines and fees.
Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Member Source.
I'm sorry, I just have to ask, following up to that question. It seems to me, and I have a little less experience working with code enforcement than some folks on here do, but pretty much exclusively complaints in the neighborhood that I live in are related to code enforcement issues. So when you say that the concern is that added folks wouldn't make up the increased fines, et cetera, are you talking exclusively with trees, or are you saying in general there wouldn't be enough code enforcement issues to make up for the staffing? Is that just the tree problem, or because I'm thinking like grass, I'm thinking all sorts of sidewalk issues, all sorts of you name it in certain parts of the community. So
yeah, certainly. So yeah, when it relates to trees, I don't think that there would be enough volume, but as it relates to every other issue we've got in the community, as far as to be able to respond to those in a timely manner, yes, we could. This is now round 4 on this question, but I will acquiesce that, yes, we could certainly use 2 more code officers. This is part of an unmet needs exercise that we went through with Josh and the finance committee, or the finance team rather, a little while ago. And there's certainly a need for 2 code officers in order to meet all the needs of the community. But in me saying that, the director in me just wants you to know that that's just one piece of a much larger picture of all the other needed FTEs, correct, right, for CD as well as for other departments too.
Sure, and I respect that. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't telling folks who are watching that we don't, there's not enough issues with code enforcement that we can find things for people to address if we hire
there's
more
plenty.
folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Member Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. This is a conundrum that we face all the time. And I know the counselors have had, and other members of the Budget Committee have had these briefings, but we also have to look at this and say, what is the value to our community? Let's just look at the tree ordinance and the tree canopy. What is the value to our community of enforcing our rules and regulations against the cutting of trees? And we're not in it to make money. We're not in it to support the staff. We're in it to do a service that is important to our city overall. And we can't expect every little silo of opportunity in the city to make money or to break even. And that's where we have I'll just say the whack-a-mole conundrum here, because we have to rob Peter to pay Paul sometimes. And those are the hard decisions that we have to make as a council. So we have to decide, okay, is it worth more to us to enforce all the tree rules, or is it worth more to us to get 3 more cops on patrol? Those are the kind of things we have to balance, and that is what makes this job worth every penny we get for it.
It's a good joke. I liked it. Any other questions on this section? Like I'm breaking up. We do have 2 other handouts that came in. And Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, you're done with your presentation tonight?
That is correct, Chair.
Okay, good. I mean, not good like that. I didn't mean it like that. You did wonderful. Thank you for all this information. But you did send us the second quarter financials and also some facts and findings about how we are handling our unsheltered neighbors, which this was questions that were asked in our January meeting. So I wanted to make sure that all the members here had a chance to ask questions on either of those parts of the materials tonight.
And just real quick, Madam Chair, if I may. You're always welcome to reach out with questions. Even if the meeting's done and you think of it tomorrow morning, feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call. Especially quarterly financials, we're always happy to talk about those. And then the unsheltered, if there's additional detail or questions you have on that staff report, just let us know and we can find that out too.
I have 3 questions. I'm kind of waiting to see if anybody else does, so I don't hog the microphone here. The first question I have is on
Madam Chair,
yeah.
I do have some questions, but I got a feeling whatever you ask is going to open up some more can of worms, and so I want to be just mindful of people's time, and so I'm not going to ask my questions, Josh, and so if I do have some, I'll just send them to you.
Okay, is everybody feeling like they're done tonight? It is 8 o'clock.
And just real quick, as is our practice, if you send us a list of questions, we'll compile those and we'll get them out to the rest of the committee also. So everyone will benefit from your question also.
Oh, that'll be great. I'll go that route then, seeing as the time is getting late. Let's see here. The final item, I'm looking at my script that Josh gives me, which is fantastic. The final item tonight under special orders of business is an opportunity for the committee to continue an earlier discussion or introduce an issue or concern for the committee's consideration. Is there anything that folks would like to bring up here tonight? Member Tigan?
Point of clarification, not a new topic. Are we going to discuss the CIP at the next meeting?
It's a good question.
Yes, that's correct. So next week you'll have the CIP public hearing, strong and diverse economy, safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure. So those results areas will be next week.
And is it 2328 CIP available to the members of the committee?
Yes. 2327. We'll get it out to you with your packet. We have it. It's at the printers right now.
Thank you.
Great. Member Hoyt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up to Josh's statement there, will we need to come down to get those, or will they be delivered like they have been in years past?
We'll have the online copies available, of course. And then if you'd like it dropped off, we're happy to accommodate. So just let us know if you'd like your meeting materials delivered. You know, in this case, it's an agenda packet and the CIP, so a little bit more than just paper.
Thank you.
The only thing else left on our agenda tonight is public comment, and we do not have anyone signed up. So if there are no further questions for tonight, then I will, okay. We'll adjourn the meeting then. Thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
For more videos and for more information, go to capitalcommunitymedia.org and follow us on social media.